Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well today. My name is Alan Duddy, and I'd like to introduce Rob Lowney from Dublin City University. And we're going to take you through our session today on creating cognitively engaging quiz questions with Vevox. You're all very welcome indeed. And this is, I suppose, our first pan-Irish webinar, Rob. I'm based up in Belfast here in the north. Rob, the clue's in the name, based at DCU down in Dublin. So, Rob, you're very welcome indeed, as everyone else is on the attendee list. Rob, is the weather as bad in Dublin as it is in Belfast today?
Yes, it is. It's a day for ducks down here in Dublin, let me tell you. It's very, very wet and grey.
It's definitely not much better here in Belfast, Rob, that's for sure. Folks, those of you that have already joined the session, you can, if you've used Vevox before, you're very welcome to join on the app and Android or iOS. Alternatively, if you're joining for the first time, you can go to your browser, any browser at vevox.app, that's vevox.app. And today's session ID, folks, it's going to be 178-806-564, and that will take you into the live Vevox session. I'm excited to know more from Rob. I don't know what he has planned, but there's going to be some engaging, some interactive questions for us, and no doubt you can leave today's session with a much greater knowledge. I'm definitely not an expert myself in creating questions, so it's going to be really exciting to see what Rob shares with us today. If you do want to share the recording, we will be sending a copy of that to you folks, so feel free to share that internally with your learning technology staff or staff within your department, school, or faculty. We'd be delighted to hear more from them. Maybe you have your own ideas about creating questions as well. So we'd be delighted to, Rob and I'd be delighted to hear more around your own particular ideas. Okay, we've got a few more attendees joining us all the time. I'll just leave it for a moment or two to let a few more of us join. Again, folks, if you've already used Vevox before, you may already have the app. So you can join directly on Android or iOS app. Or today, if you want to join straight off, just go to vevox.app on your browser. And the session ID, the nine-digit session ID is listed right there. Okay, a little bit on Rob before we start. Rob is a learning technologist based in the Teaching Enhancement unit at DCU in Dublin. Rob works daily with academic staff to enhance their teaching, learning, assessment, and no doubt much more as well. Rob, that's just a small part of your role. But Rob's particular interest is really in empowering those staff to implement technology enhanced assessment strategies. And obviously this feeds directly into today's session and Rob's various different specialisms. Also, Rob is an expert in flipped learning, mobile devices in education. We're going to be using these today, and learning analytics, as well as student partnership and digital learning policy. Rob holds a BA and an MA from UCD in Dublin and an MSc in Applied E-Learning from Dublin Institute of Technology. I think that's now TU Dublin. Rob, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And DIT is merged into TU Dublin along with a couple of other campuses there. So, and Rob's currently pursuing doctoral studies in his digital learning. Rob, so you're a busy man, no doubt. Parent, teacher and studying at the same time. So fabulous to see. Folks, again, those of you, I see there's a few more people just joining. You're very welcome indeed to today's session. Rob can reiterate the joining instructions shortly. The instructions are also in the chat for GoToMeeting, folks. So if you click on the little chat icon there, you'll see you can go to vevox.app and today's session ID 178-806-564. And I'm going to hand over to Rob to make Rob the presenter.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thanks to everyone here today who's taken some time to come along and have a listen. I won't speak for too long. I'm just going to speak for a few minutes, and really what I want to try and do today is maybe just, you know, take a broad strokes approach to creating quiz questions, and maybe leave you with a few ideas as to ways that you can make your quizzes with your learners a bit more cognitively engaging. And it will be an interactive session, as Alan said, so please do connect to the Vevox session, because I'm also hoping it'll be an opportunity for all of you here at the webinar to share your advice and share your guidance as well. Everything to do with assessment and everything to do with quizzes is a very, very broad arena, and I don't think any one person can be an expert in any of this, but I think together we can probably collectively pool some wise and some sage advice. So I actually want to kick off with you folks and hear a bit from you. So we're going to kick off with the first of our Vevox polls. So if you haven't yet connected to the Vevox session, please do. You can see the instructions are there on screen. Join at vevox.app and enter the 9-digit code 178-806-564. All right. And for those of you that are connected, I'm going to open the first poll, which is very just simply asking you, how are you today? I am wet. As I said earlier, it's raining cats and dogs in Dublin at the moment, so I'm soaking wet, and it's very wet in Belfast as well, where Alan is. But let's check in with the rest of you. How are you feeling today? Well, quite a lot of us have connected there to the session. And I'm going to close off this poll now. So the last of you get your responses in. I'm going to close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, most of us have responded. Let's see how we're feeling today. Okay, some of us are good, excellent, middling. Some are tired, cold, fine, sunny. Someone has a sleeping emoji there. Happy, hungry, yes, if you haven't had lunch yet, you might be hungry. Cold, optimistic, excited, relaxed, breezy. Okay, a good range of emotions there. We all seem to be fairly all right, which is good. Let me move on to another question now, okay? And this one might take a bit more bit more thinking. And I want to get your opinion on quizzes, okay? And there's two questions here that I'm really asking you for. Do you think quizzes are good for students? Okay, and if you are someone who does use quizzes, what tools do you use for quizzes? So you can answer one or both of those questions together. You don't need to give me any great level of detail. One or two words would be sufficient. I'm not looking for an academic essay on the pros and cons of quizzes for students, but I just really want to get a sense of you folks here today, and your level of practice, if any, with quizzes, and what you do to make quizzes a reality with your students. And this is an open text response in Vevox, so you'll have a little text box on your screen where you can jot in a few keywords or a sentence, and I think you just need to tap the send button at the bottom of the text box just to send in your response. So quite a few of us have responded there now. I might close off this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's close it off. And let's see what you all think Automating knowledge checks are a good way to break up content, identify sticking points. Yeah, very good. And I'm going to speak a bit about this. Knowledge checks are very good formative use of quizzes for students. There's some other similar products here to Vevox being mentioned. These are some of the tools that you were using. Quizzes are great for feedback. That's a really important point around quizzes. Sometimes we think that quizzes are just about asking questions, but really what's the most important thing about quizzes in any form of assessment really is actually the feedback you give to students. And here we have feedback coming up again, can be good for formative assessment. Some people using things like Zoom polls. Yeah, if you're teaching online with like Zoom or Collaborate, they sometimes have built-in polls and questions. Brightspace is a virtual learning environment. Some people use quizzes in that. Yeah, very good. Interaction in a lecture, particularly for less confident students, which is very good. Excellent. Okay, so overall, we seem to be positively disposed towards quizzes. We're using a variety of tools like Vevox and others, or virtual learning environments and so on. We're saying it's good for learning, it's good for engagement, it's good for formative assessment, good for feedback. Very good. Okay, so we all seem to be of broadly the same mindset here, which is good. That bodes well for the remainder of this session. So thanks very much for that. We will come back to Vevox again shortly, so you can, if you have Vevox open on another screen or device, you can leave that open there. But before we get into some of the nuts and bolts, I just want to pause for a moment and just think about what is engagement, or what is cognitive engagement. And there's a very useful framework for online student engagement developed by Redmond et al., which has 5 different domains of engagement, things like social engagement, collaborative engagement, cognitive engagement, and there's a few others. And the authors state that kind of designing for these different domains of engagement in online learning or in other forms of learning goes a long way to help student success. And the authors define cognitive engagement as the active process of learning. So students are actively doing something with their knowledge, with their learning, and that is cognitive engagement. And they distinguish between 2 types of engagement: surface and deep cognitive engagement. So surface engagement would be something like a student simply recalling facts without any sort of interrogation or criticality, or sharing ideas or sharing opinions or sharing thoughts without any kind of deep reconstruction of that knowledge. And deep engagement would be the opposite of that, would be maybe where they're applying or integrating different ideas and different knowledge together. They're coming up with new things, new ideas as a result of their engagement. And deep cognitive engagement is obviously something we probably want to try and foster in our students, because that really helps them with their learning and their development. Some indicators of when students are cognitively engaged are things like when they are thinking critically, when they are integrating ideas together to form new things, to synthesize new things, or where they're justifying decisions. So they're explaining, giving a rationale for doing one thing one way or another. It can be difficult because I think often when we think of quizzes, we tend to think of surface engagement, just simply factual recall, simply knowledge regurgitation. It can be difficult to cater for deep cognitive engagement in quizzes, but it's not impossible. And hopefully, this webinar today will give you a few ideas as to how you can proceed. Some of us are probably familiar here with Bloom's taxonomy, a very common thing in education. And we can see at the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, things like knowledge and comprehension are the initial stages of learning for students. And we often, again, associate quizzes with these lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where we're testing students' knowledge. Do they know something? Do they know if something is correct or not? Do they know how to kind of interpret and present information, etc.? And that the higher order levels in Bloom's taxonomy, synthesis, analysis, they can be difficult to cater for in a quiz, but not impossible. With a bit of creativity and with a bit of thinking and preparation and revision and refinement, you can cater for some of these higher order activities in a quiz. Talking about quizzes, and I suppose really, when I say quizzes, I'm thinking of online quizzes. I don't remember the last time I ever took or devised a quiz that was paper-based. I think most of us, and from the Vevox poll, most of us are using electronic tools to cater for quizzes. And really, I think that's probably the ubiquitous method of delivering quizzes in education. And obviously the benefits of online quizzes or technology-enabled quizzes are things like auto-grading and auto-feedback is a big positive. Obviously that it reduces the workload of educators if they don't have to grade and give feedback on quiz questions. Scale is important, so with something like a VLE or with a tool like Vevox, you can quiz a lot of students at the same time. Because these quizzes are done electronically, it therefore generates data, and over time you can generate vast amounts of data which can then be analyzed so that you can ascertain trends and patterns among your students and how they're learning, how they're performing. But you can also analyze how good your quizzes are, and are students getting very, very high scores or very low scores, etc. And that can give you insight into how to refine your quizzes. And again, many quiz tools, and particularly in virtual learning environments, there's a whole variety of different types of questions you can ask: multiple choice, essay type questions, matching questions, image-based questions, etc. So online quizzes offer us a lot of benefits. But they aren't without their challenges at the same time. There's two sides to everything. And it can be difficult with quizzes to find the right pitch. So what level of difficulty of questions am I going to put forward to the students? What mix am I going to give? How much time, particularly in a summative quiz, how much time am I going to give for them? Or if you're doing a quiz in class with Vevox, how much time are you going to dedicate to that? And when do you leave the polls open and when do you close them, etc.? It can be difficult in terms of planning. And the only way to really overcome those challenges is just trial and error and piloting your quizzes, doing your quizzes, revising, refining your quizzes over time. There can often be question marks raised around academic integrity around online quizzes, and I suppose here I'm meaning perhaps when students are taking quizzes asynchronously, are they sharing answers with one another? Are they committing some sort of identity fraud? Is someone else taking the quiz for them on their behalf? Those academic integrity issues aren't exclusive to quizzes. Of course, there's academic integrity issues with all sorts of assessment and the ways we design assessment. So again, a bit of creativity around your quiz questions and your quiz parameters can help support academic integrities. But it does require preparation and some thinking, which again, often I think quizzes can have a bad reputation. People think, oh, it's very easy, I'll just throw together a little quiz, it won't take any time at all. But actually, to design a very good quiz, a challenging quiz, a quiz that's engaging for students, does take time and thinking and preparation. Generally, when we think of quizzes, there's sort of two categories that questions can fall into. Subjective questions, which I suppose are open to interpretation from the student, where you're asking the student or the learner to provide an original answer of theirs. And those type of questions are kind of open-ended questions, essay-type questions, scenario or problem-based learning questions, where really each individual student can give a different flavor of a response. Those are particularly good for testing that higher order thinking. If we think back to Bloom's taxonomy, if we think of kind of evaluation, synthesis, analysis, those higher order skills, subjective questions are very good for that. The downside of subjective questions is obviously in most cases you can't avail of things like auto grading and auto feedback in subjective questions, because by their nature students are going to give different responses, all of which can broadly be correct. Where we find quizzes most used is asking objective questions. This is where there's kind of one or more than one correct answer to of Bloom's taxonomy all around knowledge and comprehension and understanding and so on. Does a student know something? Does a student know that this fact is this fact? Can a student recall this? But some objective answers, some objective questions can be used to test some of the higher order things. So asking students, thinking of X and thinking of Y, what would be the consequences, for Z? So that requires them to do a bit of thinking. That requires them to integrate ideas and integrate knowledge to come to some other conclusion. So although sometimes we think objective questions can be quite limited, a little bit of creativity, you can actually hit some of those higher order levels. The most common type of objective question, of course, is our good old MCQ, multiple choice question, or some people call it a multiple guess question, because, you know, there is a chance, obviously, students can just guess an answer and they might be correct. True or false, fill in the blank. You know, those are probably the ones we're most familiar with. Quiz tools. You all shared some of your common quiz tools earlier in the first Vevox poll. I like to think, and the advice that I give my academics here in DCU is that if they want to run a summative quiz with students, so a quiz that's worth some portion of marks to the final module grade, that is kind of somewhat mid to high stakes in nature, I usually advise them to use our VLE quiz tool. And our VLE here in DCU is Moodle. I'm a big fan of Moodle and a big fan of the Moodle quiz. Be interested to know, you can let me know on the Q&A board what your own VLE is and how you find the quiz tool in your VLE. I'm a big fan of the Moodle one anyway, because it allows for a great variety of question types. There's some very detailed student access logs, so you can kind of, you know, dive in and kind of see when did the student log on, when did they not log on, etc. You can use standard VLE features like applying deadlines, applying extensions, applying overrides for different students who have different needs, etc. So you can have a lot more flexibility there. And certainly in the case of Moodle, I'm not sure about other VLEs, but I know in the case of Moodle, there are fantastic quiz analytics that you can access afterwards, and not just in terms of seeing how well students performed in quizzes, but actually looking at how well did questions perform in quizzes and how easy or difficult did students find answering questions, which goes a long way to helping you refine your quiz questions over time. For formative quizzes, so maybe in-class quizzes or self-paced knowledge check quizzes, or activities where you're just checking in with students, checking their knowledge, doing that kind of assessment of learning piece, I generally tend to advise our lecturers to use Vevox. And the reason for that is the ease of access and ease of use. It's very quick and easy to set up some quizzes and some polls in a Vevox session. It's a bit more difficult, certainly in Moodle anyway. It takes a bit more time to set up a quiz in Moodle. Generally, when using Vevox, not always, but generally you're using it live in class with students, so therefore there can be dialogic engagement. As they're going through the quizzes, you can be discussing the answers, discussing feedback. And that came up in the first Vevox poll, that theme of feedback came up, and Vevox as a tool in a class can support that kind of dialogic engagement of feedback. Vevox, again, is great for scale. And a great thing that I'm certainly always promoting in DCU with the use of Vevox is the anonymity by default, which is what we have enabled in DCU, because it gives students that sense of safety, that they can try something that they might not get right, but they can learn from it, you know. And that is what learning ultimately should be about, is creating that safe zone where students can fail or can do poorly, but can learn from it. So that's kind of the very simplistic division of tools that we tend to abide by in DCU. I have a couple of tips here for getting you to think about how to write good quizzes, good quiz questions. I'll go through them very quickly, and I will say I'll share my slides at the end, so you can have a copy of them and you can refer back to them in your own time. So I'll just quickly go through these, and then we'll move on to some more interactive stuff. First thing to say is, obviously, make sure if you want to use a quiz, that a quiz is the most appropriate strategy for your particular needs. You know, if you are testing something a bit more complex, you know, something like a piece of continuous assessment, an essay, a project, etc., might be better for assessing student learning outcomes. So make sure a quiz is the best strategy, is first and foremost what I would say to you. I would advise you to use formative quizzes regularly. That came up again in the Vevox poll at the start here. I think formative uses of quizzes over time are a great way for students to learn and to also see their own progression in their learning. I always advocate to use a mix of question types, you know, mix it up with different formats, but mix it up in terms of the method of the question itself. So use text, use imagery, use video in your quizzes. Use a mix of objective and subjective questions as well. Again, we said earlier, the subjective stuff is very good for students displaying higher order things, but the objective questions, very often you can, you know, leverage auto feedback and auto grading for those. Multiple choice is very common, and multiple choice questions are good. I prefer multiple response questions, where you're kind of asking students to maybe select 2 out of 5 correct answers or 3 out of 7 correct answers, etc., because that requires a bit more thinking on students' behalf. They're not just having to recognize the answer in the potential list, but they're having to kind of recall a number of correct answers. I would randomly distribute correct answers in multiple choice questions, so don't have the correct answer always as the first one or the last one. Make sure your answers are of kind of similar length, that one answer isn't more complex than the others, because then students will often deduce, okay, well that answer is more complex, so it's probably more correct. And try avoiding using an answer which is all of the above, none of the above. I would use true false questions sparingly. Again, they're not hugely cognitively engaging, and if you are to use true false, use more false questions than true questions. When writing your questions, make sure the question stem is very clear. It's not overly long, not overly convoluted, and limit the use of negatives. Where you're using distractors in multiple choice questions, so alternative options in a multiple choice questions, ensure they're realistic. And that can be the most difficult thing about a multiple choice question, is you might be writing it and you know immediately what the correct answer is, and you're kind of racking your brain to think up of some alternatives, and you end up just putting down something off the top of your head, and it can be very obvious to a student that is an incorrect answer just by virtue of the fact that it's unrealistic. So try and make sure they're realistic. If you're using fill in the blanks type questions, you need to make sure you're omitting some significant piece of information that the student has to recall and that the student has to input, but you don't want to have so many blanks in a fill in the blank question that it becomes impossible for a learner to decipher. Open text questions, open-ended questions, as we said, those subjective questions, they're great for higher order material, but I would avoid them for basic factual recall. If you're just wanting students to engage in factual recall, your multiple choice, your fill in the blanks are best for that. But again, remember, as I said already, your subjective questions are not easily auto-graded. This came up again at the start of the Vevox poll. The best thing I think about quizzes and most forms of assessment really is the provision of feedback and the opportunity for reflection, for the opportunity for students to, particularly if you're doing a series of quizzes, to build their learning over time. So provide opportunities for that. Review and renew your questions regularly over time, so you refine and you get better at them. And inject a bit of humor and some fun and some prizes and things like that into quizzes, particularly, if you're doing a formative quiz in class with Vevox, a bit of that will kind of help take the seriousness out of it, make it a bit more fun, make it a bit more enjoyable, and whilst obviously still being a learning exercise. And then whether you're using Vevox or a VLE tool, look at the data and see what questions are proving effective. So those are kind of some of my top quiz approaches to making quizzes a bit more engaging for students. And I want to jump back quickly to another poll now, and I can see there's some Q&A there, and we'll get to the Q&A shortly. But I just want to hear from you very quickly. Another open-ended poll here. Do you have any other advice for making quizzes more engaging? So I've gone through a couple of top tips myself, but I'd really like to hear from you. Do you have any other advice for making quizzes more engaging? So please do share on the poll there. If you have disconnected from Vevox, you can reconnect there. The details are on the screen. You can join at vevox.app and enter in the 9-digit code as you see it on screen there. What I'll do is actually I'll just display the results as they're coming in. They're coming in slowly but surely. So let's see what you're all kind of saying. Fast-paced, a couple of toughies. Yeah, that's good. Definitely different polls, different question types. Using images is very good. Yeah. Integrating session content. Yeah, very good. Pre-post lecture activities, very good use of quizzes. Yeah, absolutely. Integrating into teaching session rather than in one go. I like that. Yeah, so scaffolding kind of different questions throughout a session is good. Yeah, issues regarding quiz fatigue. That's a very good point. Too much of something can probably be off-putting for students, and I think not just with quizzes but with any sort of learning activity, it's about using it when it's appropriate to use it, and not just using it for the sake of using it. And hopefully that avoids fatigue. Allows students to design their own. That's a great point, and I know in DCU a colleague of mine has done that very successfully in one of her modules, where she's asked students to co-create quiz questions, and then everyone takes the quiz, and they've come up with some really great questions, and devised some really good feedback for the questions as well. Give feedback, get students to create quizzes. Excellent, some great questions there. I'll close that off now. And what I might do is I have a couple of sample questions here, but I'm conscious of time. So what I might just do is just pass back to Alan now for some Q&A, and then maybe in the course of the Q&A, if it comes up, we can take a look at one or two of the quiz questions that I've devised. So I'll throw back to you now, Alan. Anyway, for the moment.
Yeah, we have plenty of time, Rob, but certainly maybe what we can do is take a 2 or 3 questions, and then maybe if we, a couple of minutes there, if that's sufficient for your questions, let's switch back into those. Fantastic. So what do we have? We have our Q&A board showing, folks, and top here we have 4 likes for how often would you recommend quizzing your students, Rob? I suppose that's really a question around do we quiz them enough, or do we quiz them too much?
It's a good question, and it's a very popular question, and it is a bit of a difficult one to answer. It's kind of like, how long is a piece of string sort of thing. I think it depends very much on your module and the content you're teaching your students. I have seen, for example, quizzes used regularly, kind of weekly quizzes, short weekly quizzes, as a means of consolidating understanding and factual recall. Has been effective. If you were to go down the weekly frequency, I would suggest sticking to your objective questions, with mostly objective questions, maybe some subjective questions, but using it very much in the formative sense, very much the knowledge checking sense, to help students, I suppose, bank their learning from one week as they progress into another week. So weekly can be good for that. If you're doing more summative quizzes, larger stakes, mid to high stakes quizzes, I would say maybe one to two in a semester could be good. 1 to 2 good meaty quizzes in a semester could be good for that. So I hope that answers your question, but it is a bit of a kind of a how long is a piece of string.
No, that's it. I appreciate that, Rob. Yeah, and I think you're right. What the Faculty of Medicine might want to do is different from what the Faculty of Humanities want to do, and you have that flex, obviously, with not only Vevox but other tools out there. But I suppose that feeds in. I see we now have an even higher liked question on the Q&A board. Is there a best time to quiz your students? I.e., somebody said pre and or post class. So I suppose that's really knowledge checking. There's always students that don't do that reading list you give them as well, Rob. Start of term, so your baselining versus midterm and end term, and checking on that knowledge.
Yeah, and both of those are good approaches. I'd be interested actually if anyone else has some suggestions. Please do let us know. Both of those could be good approaches. Again, it goes back to what is your content and what is it you want to assess students on. Pre and post class could be good, or simply post class could be good for them, to give them an opportunity to consolidate their knowledge. Definitely kind of mid-term and towards the end of term can be good. I'm not sure how effective a quiz could be, or I'm not sure how effective a sort of a large-ish quiz could be at the start of term. It could be a bit off-putting for students. But then you may have a rationale for doing that. You may want to establish a baseline at the start of the module. But if it is summative in nature, if it is carrying grades, and if it's happening at the start of term, there may be kind of issues of fairness there, that a student hasn't started learning anything in the module yet, and already they're being quizzed and they're being assessed on it. So I think you kind of need to balance out some of those concerns as well.
Totally. Cheers, Rob. Rob, just one point before, if you want to run your question or two there, we've got some time there, but just the third point there is somebody just saying, I've started using multiple response also in place of MCQ, so a little bit more challenging. Multiple response, if I'm correct, that's maybe like 5 options within your question and kind of a choose all of apply approach, as opposed to just having the one correct answer.
Yeah, that's it, and it's and I should be clear here. In a multiple response question, like you say, you might have kind of 5 options, and the student needs to select the 2 that are correct, or the 2 that are, or the 3 that are correct, etc. But I would definitely, in a multiple choice question, avoid having an option which is, you know, all of the above or none of the above being an option in and of itself. That's not particularly engaging. But I find, and I'm glad whoever popped that in there, I'm glad you found the same thing, because you know, I certainly moved towards multiple response questions in my time, and I advise a lot of our academics to go to that as well, because it is that little bit more challenging. Because that's, you know, with a single response multiple choice question, a student can get by on recognition. You know, they can recognize an answer, but with multiple response, they can't solely just rely on recognition. They have to do a bit of thinking in order to select the correct options.
Exactly. You got to put those students under a wee bit of pressure, don't you, Rob? Cracking. Rob, we've got a few minutes. Maybe if you want to run your questions over the next couple of minutes, and then I'll have a couple of slides to wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, sure thing. So this is again now, as I said, you know, the early advice I gave you, you need to make sure a quiz is the best tool for your method. You know, it should be aligned to your outcomes, etc. But nonetheless, I put together a couple of questions here, which is just for more fun than anything else, and really, it's to get at the idea of mixing things up, using different formats. Using a kind of, you know, simply clear written questions can go a long way to engaging students. So I've popped a simple question up for you there. It's a true false question. As I said before, use these sparingly in a quiz, because they're not hugely engaging. You know, a student has a 50-50 chance of getting something right because there's only 2 options on the screen. But as you can see here, this is a very simple question, very clear stem. Halloween is derived from an ancient Sumerian festival. Nothing overly convoluted, no use of negatives, and then simply true or false is the answer. So what I might do is, most of us have responded, and what I'm going to do now here is close it, and let's have a look, see what people said. So 58 people have said false, and 41.94 have said true. And what is the correct answer? The correct answer is false. All right, and here's my feedback. Again, going back to what we said already, feedback is a huge part of quizzes and a huge part of all assessment, in my opinion. So a bit of feedback there for you. The roots of Halloween are held to derive from the ancient Gaelic harvest festival of Samhain. So well done to 58% of you who got that answer correct. The answer was false. And hopefully those of you who answered true, hopefully you've learned something there, because again, quizzes really, in my mind, are a good learning tool. Let's quickly do another poll. So which of the following are items not associated with Halloween? So again, another clear stem, very simple language. I am using a negative in here though. I'm saying which of the following are not associated with Halloween. So negatives are okay. I wouldn't overly rely on them in a quiz, and I also wouldn't make the language in the question overly convoluted, because the meaning can be lost. So again, very simple question, simply written, 1 negative in it, and I'm asking the learners to select 1, but possibly more. So I'm saying which of the following are items. So here you need to do a bit of thinking and close that off. Most of you have responded. So what are we all saying? So a lot of you saying hot dogs and ice cream. All right. And let me see the results. What are the results? Surprise, surprise, the correct results are hot dogs and ice cream. So that was quite an easy question, you know. If I was doing something like this with a student, I probably wouldn't be very happy with that distribution, because it would probably speak more to me that I haven't written a particularly challenging question. But I, you know, again, trial and error, I think, comes into play a lot with quizzes and refining your quizzes over time. Using that analysis, using the data to inform your quiz practice can help you improve over time. I'll fly through a few more now. So another question, there is an Irish Halloween, if you haven't already guessed, you know, in the pan-Irish theme of today's webinar, all of, you know, a lot of these questions are to do with Halloween and Ireland. So there is an Irish Halloween tradition of carving a face onto what vegetable? Potato, pumpkin, or turnip? Okay. So again, a very simple STEM, 3 possible answers. When writing multiple choice questions, I tend to go for between 3 and 5 options is what I go with. But I have seen people go up to 7 or go up to 10 options, particularly if they're asking for a multiple response from learners. So let me close that off. And let's see what people have said. So 19% saying potato, 21% saying pumpkin, and 59% saying turnip. And let's see what the answer is. The answer is, in fact, turnip. And there's a piece of feedback there for you from the Britannica Encyclopedia. It's actually turnip. So this is a case of potentially, this question probably performed better than the last question because those 2 distractors there, the potato and the pumpkin, are quite realistic, you know, in that we're familiar with pumpkins from American pop culture, and the potato is a vegetable that's closely associated with Ireland. So those are very plausible distractors, you know, and people probably had to stop and think to select the right answer, to select the turnip as the correct answer. That's a good example there of a good distractor. Another question now, fill in the blanks. In the movie Hocus Pocus, the 3 witches are known as the Blank Sisters. So you need to type in an answer. There's no recognition here. There's no option available on screen for you to look at. You have to stop and fully think and fully recall this piece of information. If you have this piece of information, of course, and hopefully you do. Hocus Pocus is my favorite Halloween movie. Don't know if anyone else likes it. You might let us know on the Q&A board what's your favorite Halloween movie. So most of us are responding there. Just in the interest of time, I hope you don't mind, I'll close it off. We have a couple of responses in. So let me close that off now in 3, 2, 1. So lots of responses here. Sanderson's, Beverly, Sanderson, Winnie, Sarah, Mary, Magic, the Spooky Sisters, the Naughty Sisters, the Strange Sisters, the Bad Sisters, Charmed. It's not Charmed, I'm afraid. The correct answer is, we go up, it is the Sanderson sisters. And I've put in a couple of options here in case you misspell Sanderson. But the correct answer is Sanderson. And there's a bit of feedback there for you. Winifred, Sari, and Mara Sanderson are the 3 Sanderson sisters. Here's another question now. All right, so this is an open-ended question. This is a subjective question. So this is an open-ended text question where I'm requiring the learners to think about what we know about COVID-19 and public health guidance and so on and so forth. I'm also asking learners to think about what happens when children and parents go trick-or-treating. And I'm asking learners to think about those 2 things and then come up with advice that parents and children should follow when they're going trick-or-treating. So starting to move up beyond the lower levels of Bloom's there, starting to move into that area of integrating knowledge, joining things together to create something new. So it's a bit more challenging for learners. The downside is obviously there's no auto grading here because all of you here today could all arrive in the same location and give good answers, and they'll all be correct. You'll all express them differently. So therefore it's difficult to auto grade. Close that off now. Sorry, I know people were still responding there, just in the interest of time. So here we go, some good advice here. Quarantine suites for 72 hours. Good luck with that with some children rolling around. Don't accept cough suites. Very funny. Put a mask over your mask. Yeah. Take only packaged suites, hand gel, social distancing. Great advice here. Perfect. Okay. But as you can see, you know, there's a lot there. So probably individual grading and evaluation needs to take place. And very lastly, here's an image question. I said before, use a mix of questions, use imagery, use text, use video, use audio where you can, use lots of different media and methods to engage students. Here's a picture question, and I'm asking you to tell me which of these foods is known as Colcannon. So there's 4 pictures on the screen, 4 different types of food, all loosely associated with Halloween, and I want you to tell me which one is known as Colcannon. So I think you just tap on your screen to select the right one. Okay, so most of you have responded. Apologies, I will close this off now just in the interest of time. 3, 2, 1. So let's see. So some people chose the one here bottom right, some on the bottom left. Most people chose the top right, and the top right is correct, obviously. And Kilcannon is an Irish food made from mashed potato and cabbage. So very quickly, a couple of those tips in practice: writing good questions that are clear, using a mix of imagery, using a mix of subjective and objective. Very simple example, but kind of take that route and think about it yourself in your own context, and that will go a long way to creating some engaging questions for your students.
Rob, thank you very much indeed. I'm off to eat my Kilcannon whilst watching Hocus Pocus, but before I do that, if I can just share a couple of last slides with you. Hopefully you can see my screen okay there, folks. And if you have joined today's session, if you can excuse me, there we go, that's better. If you can follow our news updates, folks, if you're already following them, fantastic. You can subscribe to the Vevox YouTube channel, hit the bell, follow us. We are uploading some fantastic resources there for question type specifically, and there is a specific YouTube video there for each question type, and particularly the question type that Rob just shared with us, folks, the pin-on image. Do check those out. You can also subscribe to the Vevox newsletter and find us a bit more. If you go to our website, bottom left, check the box, add your email and click through. And just a little bit on our next webinar. This is part of our autumn webinar series. Today's webinar is number 2 of the September through November. Fantastic to have Kate and Jim from Aberystwyth. We're definitely going on around the countries in the UK and Ireland, but we're going to have a fabulous webinar this time in a month, folks. So if you are already part of the webinar series, you should get an invite for this. If not, go to vevox.com/resources/webinars and you can enroll in that session there. I know Rob and I are going to be there, so everyone, you'll be very welcome indeed. And we're going to go through things like icebreakers, inductions, scenario-based activities, and revision. So touching on a completely different subject in a month's time. Folks, you have been fabulous today. I just like to extend my thanks to Rob for today's session, and again, just to say thank you very much for taking time out to join us. You're very welcome indeed, and anything at all you'd like to discuss, do please let us know. Thank you.